to take my stand. Yeah, I am a roaring lamb. I am a roaring lamb, and the time has come to take my stand. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Donna Skell.
And I'm Tiffany Ross.
Welcome to Roaring Lambs. God brings us the most amazing people, and we love to share their stories of how they have seen God at work in their life. And we have a great story today and a great roaring lamb for you. So let me ask you this. What do you do with your anger? Well, our guest today saw how anger shattered his whole life. You don't want to miss this inspiring story.
This episode of Roaring Lambs is brought to you by LifeStoriesCompany.com.
Our guest today is Ron Greer. Ron is a trained man in the mirror expert on men's discipleship. He travels all over and he helps men be godly men and learn what it takes to lead a godly life. And we're so excited about having Ron here. Tiffany and I heard Ron speak at a group not too long ago, and we both looked at each other and said, yes, we want him to share his story with you. He's married to his beautiful wife, Rosalind. They live in McKinney, Texas, and they're celebrating 42
Wow.
42 years.
long, hard, wonderful years of marriage.
We're going to talk about prison later.
So, Ron, welcome to our program.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so we want to tell your whole story, but we want to start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your young years, childhood, upbringing.
Well, I again was born in a place called Denmark, Tennessee, the way we say it down there, and we moved to town, to Jackson, Tennessee, about first grade, and lived there until I was probably fourth grade, and then we moved from there to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there, and being from a southern country family, we were a bit of novelties in Wisconsin in school. And so a lot of jokes and a lot of funny things taking place. Beverly Hillbillies was the most popular program at the time, and so unfortunately, we became the Beverly Hillbillies to everybody there.
Wow.
And being a very passionate child in a large family, you learn to wrestle and fight early on. And unfortunately, I developed a habit of fighting people when I got mad at them for making fun of me.
Don't get mad at me.
So again, it became a habit, and then it became something I liked and got good at. And so I fought all the time. Anytime someone made me mad or made fun of me, I punched them. It got to a point where I was suspended a number of times, so much so that my parents and the principal, Mr. Herman Goldberg, were on first name basis at the time.
Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
My mom and dad worked and struggled all their lives, and we were extremely poor. I didn't know we were until I got older. My dad has always worked at least 2 or 3 jobs until I left home, even afterwards. He drove a mill truck in Tennessee, and we worked farms, farm work and stuff on the off time and weekends. We would go back to the country to help out there at the farm. My mom's worked as a housekeeper, kind of a nanny, cook, sort of things for a number of white families in the South at the time. She was the one that wanted to have a better life, so she moved up to Wisconsin and left her 7 kids and her husband in Tennessee. So she came to get a job and find a place to stay and save a little money. And then probably 6-7 months later, we moved north also to be reunited with her and start our new life. We had a number of cousins that would come back home sometimes to visit, and they have nice cars and some fine clothes and all. So we wanted that same good life. But we got to Wisconsin, and it was still just as poor, at least in my mind, as we were in Tennessee. But she had always wanted something better for her family. So she's always had these crazy ideas, people say. My mother, they still think she's crazy for years. And my dad he's been a hardworking man. He grew up in a household without a father, Matter of fact, so he died 2 years ago, December, but his name was Allie B. Greer, but he never had a middle name. The B was a designation as a bastard child. He was born out of wedlock, and so that's the sort of thing he grew up with. His father never lived with him, had a separate family altogether.
Wow.
But what he learned from his mother and from the men around him was you work hard, provide for your family.
Yeah.
Except he didn't get the idea of connecting as a father. He never knew that. So he never had an emotional connection, never had those sort of things at all.
Wow.
And because of it, I never really had a relationship with him, other than he's my dad.
Yeah.
And at the time you had Leave It to Beaver and Father's Knows
Yes.
Best programs.
Yep.
You always had those fantasies about having that family, and you
Yes.
knew right on that wasn't our family.
Right.
But fortunately, God did some work in my life later on where that changed. But they were hardworking folks, provided for their family no matter what. So I can honestly say, we didn't have the best and didn't always have what we wanted, but we were never without a meal of some sort,
Right. Right.
or clothes,
Yeah.
or a place to stay.
Wow. So Ron, I'm curious, with a big family like that and mom, and growing up back in the day, church was just kind of a cultural thing, like
Yes.
everybody went.
Yes.
And was that true for your family as well?
Absolutely. If you were in my mother's household on Sunday, you were going to church. And it
Well, there's a
doesn't,
little slip there.
You're doing both.
and
Yeah.
it didn't matter for her. If we'd have people visit, relatives, it doesn't matter. If you were in the house on Sunday morning, there was no staying at home with the church. Even my dad, he worked late, and on Sunday mornings, the routine is to get up and go to church with us.
Was it a positive experience? Or?
It was initially, but I was a child of the 60s. 60s rolled in, and I became more acquainted with the Black Panthers and the Black Muslims in my community. We lived in the inner city of Milwaukee, and that's it. The first Black Panther headquarters was within blocks of my house, and the first Black Muslim mosque. It's actually the second mosque ever established by Malcolm X. Was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Wow.
6 blocks from my house. So, and because our families' parents worked all day, they left their kids at home because that was the culture.
Yeah.
We had access, and they had access to us. So most of my time was spent at the Boys Club or with the Black Panther youth, learning all the Marxist and narrative about the white oppressor and racist America at the time. And I bought into it wholeheartedly.
Wow.
And you had that urge to fight. You
Yes.
had developed that response to anger
Yes.
by fighting. But
Yes.
in school, there was a teacher that took a
Yes.
special interest in you, didn't he?
When I left elementary school, my mother wouldn't let us go to the middle school. Well, back then it was called junior high.
Right.
School that was in our neighborhood because it's too bad. They were building a new school outside the neighborhood, and we moved, and she wanted to put us in that school. And the day of the orientation, she took me by myself inside the front doors, and she got right in my face, and she says, "If you get into a fight, any trouble, I'm going to kill you." And I actually thought that in her face she may have meant it. But I knew for a fact that I couldn't stay out of trouble because kids were kids. And somehow in my mind I figured out if I'm not around children, other kids, I won't get into any trouble. So at lunchtime, when they go into the lunchroom, I would sneak out the lunchroom and wander the hallways in the school until lunchtime was over. And that way I stay away from other kids. And one day I happened to be walking past my science teacher's door, and he happened to see me. And of course called me in, and I explained what I was doing. And so he invited me to come and spend lunch hour with him every day. His name was Mr. Stewicki.
Oh,
Still remember him.
That's so
So I would go in Mr. Stewicki's room, and he would let me play with the science stuff and talk. He talked to me, and then he let me talk about anything I wanted to talk about. And he never once stopped me, never once gave a reaction where the wrong thing to say, so I just felt free to keep telling him stuff.
Wow.
And one was I told him just how stupid I thought school was, and I didn't want to be around listening to a bunch of white people every day. What's the point? And so he agreed. He says, "Well, you should get out of school." And I said, "Sounds like a great idea." And he said, "Well, you can't leave. You can't get out of school unless you have a plan. You got to have a plan to do this. I can help you put that together." I'm going, "Okay." So we had this plan we were going to put together. And he had me as a dumb kid taking extra credits and going to summer school and all kinds of stuff. And one summer, I actually went to summer school during the day, and then went back at night.
Oh my goodness.
They were trying this experimental thing for a couple of years. So by the time I got to my junior year in high school, I was eligible to graduate in the first semester. Unfortunately, I wasn't old enough. I was only 16, and I was told that in Wisconsin you couldn't graduate and leave high school at 16 at the time. So I had my second semester. I didn't turn 17 until March. My second semester, I took art, audiovisual aids, swimming, gym, all kinds, and one math class. Okay. But finished high school a year early with my brother. And at the end of high school, about the last semester, I was on the bus stop one day, and I went to this bakery that we normally go to, and I'm waiting for the transfer of the bus. And I saw this amazing figure in a window, big cardboard guy with an amazing looking hat on, a Nehru jacket, and these white gloves. And it said something about we're looking for a few good men, come see the world. And I'm going, there's my ticket out of the ghetto. So I went inside and talked to this Marine recruiter. I called him a liar, but anyway, I won't do that.
Trickster.
Yeah. Talked with him, and he told me all kind of great stuff. And then as we were filling out the application, he figured out I was only 16 at the time. He goes, no. So he took me home. One of the few times my dad was at home for some reason. So he said he wanted to talk to my parents and get their permission. So he went to my house. And my dad only was concerned, well, they had to finish high school. The boy got to finish high school. And so the guy said, well, we got this amazing program. It's a 180-day delay. You can sign up today and want it to go for 180 days. And my dad said, as long as he finished high school, I could go. So I graduated on June 14th, 1973. And I started boot camp on June 15th, 1973.
Oh, my word.
Yes. And the Marine Corps was a bit of a shock because, again, I was a young black man, radical, and all of a sudden I have these crazy white men with these crazy hats screaming at me, and I'm trying to figure out why I was there, what was going on. But I wasn't in the ghetto anymore, so it wasn't underneath my parents' rule anymore. But anyway, I got there, and initially thinking, okay, I can adjust to this. But eventually it turned out it was just at the end of Vietnam. So there's a lot of racial tension in the military at the time. A lot of racial tension in America, period, at the time. The white men there were a bit bolder than they were at home, and so were we. And for the first time, I had somebody call me a nigger to my face.
Wow.
And of course, I went back to my punching days.
Was that one of the officers that?
No, just another enlisted man.
Another one.
Yeah. It was one of those things where at the time, it wasn't unusual in certain companies, certain area. Right. And we call them swines, they call us niggers. So it was one of those things where it was a reality at the end of Vietnam. And so the tensions were high. And I started getting in trouble in the military also. So I had a number of office hours. Military court-martial has 3 different levels. Well, I got a number of office hours and then got transferred from base to base. And ended up in Iwakuni, Japan. Was facing a number of years in prison there for some illegal activity and fighting MPs. They shipped me back to a place called Beaufort, South Carolina. And for some reason, I was upset, as if they had done me wrong.
Wow.
So I went to Beaufort with a chip on my shoulder and didn't want to be around a bunch of white people and didn't want to work in the squadron where I worked. So I made a request and they put me on barracks duty as a janitor, basically. I figured that way I'll be by myself and won't be around anybody and get in trouble. I had been warned by my mother and begged by my mother and fiance not to get in trouble and went back and ended up going back, committing myself to staying out of trouble and getting a loan so I can get married come June and we'd be happy ever after. But got back and just how some things work, I would have to go to the credit union to check on a loan for some furniture. Didn't want to change into my regular uniform. And so I left the base in my work uniform, went back to the credit union, back in another part of the base. And a chief warrant officer, who was the secretary of the loan committee at the credit union, came in and saw me and made a beeline right for me. And all I saw was this big old white man coming over, disrespecting me, because now he's invaded my space. And then he started asking me questions in front of all the other white people, and I took offense to that. So he decided to take us to a back room so he could talk to me, I guess. My impression as a young black man was he's trying to, violate me. So we went to the back room. He asked me to come in. And as I walked in, he tried to close the door, and I stuck my foot back. So the door wouldn't close, so I have all these witnesses out here. He took even more offense to that as being an officer. So in the Marine Corps, back then, chief warrant officers was usually guys who'd been through Korea, Vietnam. They were like gods. And I was a PFC at the time, and so he didn't take kindly to it. So he started giving me a lecture about you people. I'm assuming he means you black people. So of course I said a few choice words and told him to get off me and touched him, pushed him. And he immediately placed me under arrest and said, let's go. Well, on the way out of the credit union, I knew if I could get to a phone, I could call my commanding officer who would come get me and put me in his custody. Because otherwise I was going to the brig we called Bubba's house. And brothers didn't do too well in Bubba's house at the time. So I actually managed to get the phone at a reception desk. And as I'm dialing the phone with this young lady scared to death, he comes over and grabs me by my collar and said, you're under arrest, let's go. And I spun around and I said, this white boy has touched me. Now I'm gonna kill him. So I spun around and my intent was to punch him in his throat and collapse his windpipe and watch him choke. I punched and it was a little off, hit his chin, and I immediately punched again. And by this time his head had dropped down, he was going backwards, and the second punch missed also. I ended up fractured his jaw, knocked him over a couch, and he was out. And at the time, he fell on the floor. He looked bigger than I thought he was. So I headed toward the door. But by that time, someone in the credit union had pressed the silent alarm, I learned later. Because by the time I got to the front doors, there were police officers on the street outside, red lights and their guns pulled. But I knew they couldn't come on military property. So I just took a seat until the MPs got there, military police got there. And that began my general court-martial experience in the Marine Corps. I was facing 32 years and 9 months at hard labor. Had a general court-martial, and it lasted 5 days. And at the end of 5 days, after 42 witnesses, I think, they only give me 18 months in prison instead of the 32 years.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
From 32 years down to 18 months.
Yes. Now, anybody else would have been grateful. I was enraged.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew that now the swines that I called white people at the time was going to have control of my life. So I was upset. They took me back to the brig to wait my transport. The next day or a day two later, my lawyer came over and said the prosecutor had petitioned for another hearing before the Judge Advocate General. I'm going for what? He didn't know. He went over, dressed in my uniform, went over, and he had petitioned the judge to send me to an Army prison. I was in the Marine Corps. And he wanted me to go to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, instead of Portsmouth, Virginia. And he told the judge that I was incorrigible, that I'd be a bad influence on the young Marines and sailors being rehabilitated at Portsmouth. So they wanted to put me in Leavenworth, Army prison.
Wow.
And at the time, I knew, and he knew as well, that Marines and soldiers, Army soldiers, didn't get along well. And so when the whole thing is over, he came up to the table. He said, I didn't get the time I wanted, but I'm going to make your life hell for you. So that began my ordeal in Fort Leavenworth. Angry, enraged, and wanted to do some horrible things.
So even though you had gone to church as a child and, you know, grown up in Christian home,
Yes.
you did not have a personal relationship with
No.
Jesus.
I literally grew up in church.
Yeah.
I really did.
Yeah.
But it's by the time the mid-'60s came, late 60s, Christianity was a white man's religion. It wasn't the religion of the Asiatic black man. And so it's you know, I went because my parents made me go, and where everybody else went. But I was one of those kids who always wore the wrong thing, sat in the wrong places. I just did the routines like everybody else. And when I got ready to leave home, my mother wanted to give me a nice little talk when I left about, you know, staying close to the Lord, blah, blah, blah. And one of the most regretful statements in my entire life was, to H with all you hypocrites and God too. That was my parting conversation with my mother.
Wow.
All right, now don't worry about this man. He does come to Christ. God does transform him, and he is a wonderful born-again believer.
Yeah.
In fact, he helps other men
Yes.
do the same. So when did that defining moment happen for
I was
you?
in Leavenworth. They've kept me in solitary confinement for a long extended period of time, and I finally figured out if I cooperate, they let me go to the main population. So in the main population, I got together with some black Muslims at the time. I became Balandumu Hudari, got rid of my white Christian name and swore off my Christian religion. So I became a black Muslim there for a number of months. And they announced one day this Bill Glass crusade was coming through. But we didn't care because there's a bunch of swines coming in, who cares? But the day of the event, first time they're going to allow civilians inside the prison. The day of the event, it was in the summer, and they announced it. All of you who signed up, report to the front gate for the event. Well, okay, we're fine, I don't care. And then the next announcement a few minutes later was, all those not signed up for the Bill Glass event, report to your cells for a security lockdown. That means going up. My cell was on the 8th tier,
Oh, wow.
and old Leavenworth wasn't air conditioned. It was probably 90 some odd degrees that day, and in my cell it was probably 120.
Yep.
So a friend of mine and I, we kind of bum rushed the guy at the front gate, and for some reason, he let us go outside. I don't know why. Nothing God did.
Oh, I know why.
Yes.
That's right.
We went outside, and I had never heard of Bill Glass before. Didn't know him. I didn't meet Bill Glass until 7 years ago. That one time. I wasn't a sports fan. I knew who Roger Staubach was with him. There's a black pitcher from the Houston Astros, and some ninth degree karate master. The only thing I cared about was the karate master because I loved karate.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I didn't know anything about at all. The problem was, every time one of them started talking, they started talking about Jesus. And so by the time the karate master got done, he started talking about Jesus, I was done. So my friend and I started walking back inside the castle, we called it, and there was this little white guy standing by the entrance. We didn't care, we kept walking. For some reason, he started behind us, he was talking. Well, at the time, you can't have more than 2 people walking down the tunnel at one time. So this guard made me and this white guy sit on the bench while my friend scurried off to the cell block. Well, I knew that you don't sit and talk with swines, so I'm trying to get them to hear him let me go. This guy's still talking. I have no clue what he's talking about, what he said, except the one thing I remember he said, would you like to pray? Yeah, pray if you want to, go ahead. Yeah. He prayed. I have no clue what he prayed about, and you could offer me $10 million. I couldn't identify him if he walked in front of me today. But I went back to my life there, and within a couple of days, I just had started a number of issues with my anger got worse, and my headaches got worse, and I finally get to a point and realize in my cell sitting there how screwed up my life had been. That it was absolutely horrible, as respectful as I looked at the time.
It's like God held up a mirror
Yes.
and said, look,
Your
Ron,
life.
look at yourself.
Yes.
This is where you are. This is who
Yes.
you are.
You realize you're the bottom of the barrel. So I sat there, and all of a sudden, all the God stuff that I learned as a kid started flowing back, and then been prompted by that. And my only reaction was, okay, God, listen here. If you're real,
Listen here.
get my head straight. You know, so that's all I wanted at the time. So I ended up crying and falling asleep in my bunk. I got up, when he got something to eat, and came back, and I felt light as a feather. I said, okay, God, man, listen. You keep doing this for me, you can have anything I got. My very last breath if you want it. And that was my commitment to the Lord at the time.
Wow.
And my entire life changed in that one moment.
Wow.
So I committed then I went to the chapel like the next day or so, got a Bible from the white chaplain who wanted to talk and didn't want to talk, just wanted a Bible. So I got my Bible and just started pouring through every day. And I got transferred to a 2-man cell shortly thereafter. And there was another guy there named Will, who had a religious experience also. So we just spent all of our free time reading the Bible, discussing what we had learned from the Lord, and then walking around the prison. You know, you need Jesus, brother. But initially, I went back to my mom and explained to them how I was a Christian. I was no longer going to be a part of the Nation of Islam, swore all that off, and took back my Christian name, and so separated from them. And so I became this jailhouse preacher, they call it, at the time. But we were on fire for Jesus. I mean, way off on some stuff.
Yeah.
But on fire.
Yeah.
So that was the rest of my time in prison, and I determined when I got out, I was going to go back to my home church. I'm going to teach the kids, and I'm going to teach the teenagers, and I'm going to be on fire for Jesus. And I got back, and the pastor and other folks were like, well, yeah, no. You're ex-con. No, we can't be with the kids. Right. But that's fine, I didn't care. There were plenty of things I did outside the church and sharing the Lord with people there.
And tell us about, God really performed many miracles in your life. I mean, the short sentence that you were upset about. Yes. But then this conversion experience, a true divine conversion experience in the jail, but in prison. But your occupations afterwards, total miracle. Share with us about that.
Completely.
Yeah.
So one of the prayers was for God to give me someone. I was a bit of a womanizer, and I wanted to be, pure and right. And so God gave me this beautiful, well, homely at the time, but became beautiful. No, this young lady. We got married, and we both at the time became serious about our faith and praying for God to give us a better life. And all of a sudden, her father, who lived in a different city, said they were looking for firefighters, and I'm going, okay. So he wanted me to apply. So we applied for this job. And out of, I think, 350 people, they hired 23. And so they gave me an opportunity for the job. I went to the final interview for the commission, and they actually turned me down. The fire chief, who I didn't know, for some reason, went to the commission and said he was going to hire me anyway. So they said, okay. He told me later, they said, well, it's your job if it doesn't work out. Well, I went to the interview. I had my arm in a sling. I had a patch over my eye. I have 9 stitches in my eye from a karate tournament. They thought I had been fighting still. Oh. And I was limping. So they turned me down. Oh, wow. But for some odd reason, this guy who I didn't know, his name was Ed Durkin, hired me. And then after he hired me, he says, listen, my job's on the line. If you screw up, I'm going to have your butt first. So I got this job as a firefighter for 19 years. When I came on the job, they had just started the EMT certification. So our department was the first department where you had to have be an EMT and a firefighter at the same time. Well, the problem was, if you're a convicted felon, you can't necessarily just go through the process to become. You have to be approved. So I went through the whole process, and they asked for all kind of information. I sent them letters and information, and for some reason, they approved my license. And every 2 years after that, for 19 years, I had to give it right out a statement, give all kind of questions, and for some reason, they would approve it each time. So yeah, I became a emergency medical technician for that 18 years. I was a hazmat technician and a scuba rescue diver.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you ran for office.
Yeah. So the job of the fire
department go together.
Right. Well, the job of the fire department, part of being a firefighter, there was a lot of public exposure, a lot of different people. So I became very active in the community, and there were a number of issues at the time that were affecting our community. My wife and I actually moved to a part of town that nobody wanted to live in, specifically to impact that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We bought a house. God blessed us with a house there. We bought a house, and there were a number of issues in the community. One being a very large homosexual population, where they were adopting these black kids, the hard-to-place kids. So I sounded an alarm about what was happening to the kids in the neighborhood, and there were people who took offense to that. And eventually, it became a news story, and then they hired a lesbian fire chief. Well, the way they hired her was illegal, because we knew the affirmative action officer and the mayor's assistant, who had, in conversations among ourselves, explained what they were doing, why they were doing it. Well, I publicly denounced and objected to it. And so they hired her, and then my words became this basis for their legal fight to fire me, because I was hateful and bigoted, blah, blah, blah. And that lasted for about 2.5, 3 years. Wow. $890,000 until later in legal fees.
Whoa.
And they fired me. And by that time, I become very politically involved in the community. Just realized that there were no Christians involved. The people involved didn't really have much courage about issues that affect the family and religious liberties.
Right.
So I became this sort of radical Christian who wanted to go in and impact those things. So I ended up, a friend challenged me to stop talking and do something. So I decided, he talked me into running for Congress.
Wow.
There were 5 candidates beside me. They'd been running 9 months. I jumped in 10 weeks before the election. Everybody thought I was crazy. I became the entertainment for the media, but unbeknownst to them, it was free coverage. And the night of the election, in a little small bar in a little country town, I finished second of the 6 candidates. And only 350 votes separated me from the campaign winner.
Wow.
So that was the first time, and then 2 years later, decided to do it again. The party had blocked me out, and I had to hire 3 college students to be my campaign staff. We won the primary and beat the candidate the party chose.
Wow.
And that kind of lit a fuse after that. So I spent a number of years back and forth in D.C. and what you call doing public policy issues. Spoke before a congressional delegation and congressional briefing in Washington, D.C. Spent a lot of time with different organizations also about public policy that affect the families and religious liberties.
I want to point out something that I really love about you and your story and what your wife have done. You're not just running for office and wanting to change things in the culture, but you're bringing it literally to home.
Yes.
How many people have you had live in your home, strangers that have needed a place?
So in 23 years, we've had 36 people live with us.
Wow.
29 ex-prisoners, and 1 guy from the Witness Protection Program.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, my family and friends thought I was an absolute loon because I was a firefighter and I worked 24 hours, and I leave my wife and kids at home with these perfect strangers. But we had the house that we had, it was another miracle that God did, and we had prayed and devoted this house to Him. The idea was that everything we had, we knew came from the Lord, because nothing in our life made sense for the job I had, the money we had, or even the ability to buy a house. None of our friends could buy a house. So we had this thing that kind of God just kind of sit in our laps. So we devoted it to Him. And the same with our kids. Each child was born, we'd have a ceremony at church where we literally dedicate them to the Lord. So when it came down to this, by the time I was doing prison ministry, working with guys in the prison by this time, and a guy got out of prison, showed up in my neighborhood across the street, and the thing to do was to help him out. The problem is they had no place to go. So I took him in. That was Tracy. And so our idea was, okay, how do you administer the love of Christ to someone? Either I can give him something, I can talk to him, or I can bring him in and walk with him. So that became my discipleship process with the men and women that came to our home, because most of them had no place else to go. And if all I have belongs to the Lord, if all I am belongs to Him, how can I not give it to other folk who are in need also? So yeah, 36 people total.
Wow.
So my kids have never known a house where some ex-con hasn't been living with us.
And how did you get involved with Man in the Mirror?
So all those years of discipling the men in our household, a friend, the guy who discipled me, challenged me once. He says, okay, so who are you pouring into? And I'm going, well, I'm teaching Sunday school and I'm doing the Bible study at the prison. He goes, oh, no, man, no. Who are you pouring into? Like me and you doing right here. I'm going, I'm doing these things. He goes, no, you're not. You're in sin. I'm going, man, what are you talking about? He said, Ron, who are you pouring in personally? You. Like you and I are right here every week. And I go, well, nobody. He said, yeah, right, you're in sin. God says that you're a faithful man. Things I've taught you, now pouring into faithful men. Why aren't you doing that? And God convicted me then. So there was a guy at our church right after that, ex-con, who came to our church, Monroe. I went to talk to him, latched on to him, invited him to my Sunday school class, and then he wanted to know more. I said, would you be willing to meet with me every week? So we met at 9 o'clock on Tuesday nights. because my wife was in bed and the kids were in bed. I couldn't take time away from them. So we met, and that Monroe, the one guy, ended up being 5 guys for the next 3 years. And then there was another group of 4 guys rather, for another 3 years. So God had taught and trained me the way that we make disciples is actually interacting life on life, living with them, and then showing them through our lives, as well as teaching that way. So that became a passion of mine. So I started talking, teaching other people. So, but when we left Wisconsin, my wife needed a break. So she got a job in Florida. She said I could move or commute. I got the message. So we moved to Florida for 4 years. I decided to disconnect from ministry, disconnect from everything, because somehow she wanted to move away, and I missed that. One of the things I always taught men to do was study your wife. There's no such thing as she wanted a divorce out of the blue. If you said it out of the blue, that means you weren't paying attention. Wow. So here I was, not paying attention. So I said, Lord, you know what? If I miss that, I'm off track. So I'm going to disconnect it. So I shut the ministry down. I stopped doing Bible study. I was a pastor of a church, left that, and did nothing. And we moved to Orlando, Florida. I was a pizza delivery guy for Papa John's for 4 years.
Wow.
And thinking that, I told the Lord that when he wants me to re-engage again, then it has to come through my wife. Because otherwise, I didn't trust myself. So all those people I was working with, I just sort of disconnected from them. I didn't do it well, but I knew I had to. So we got a job, stayed in Florida 4 years. She got a job here in Dallas. We moved here 15 years ago, 14 years. And about 2 years after moving here, 3 years, she wanted me, she was volunteering for the pregnancy center, and they were moving to a new location, and she wanted my input on the things they were planning. So we sat and talked, and about 40 minutes later, we got done, and she was shaking her head and said, I don't know why you're doing nothing. Because at the time, I had a home repair and remodeling business. And she said, you're doing nothing. I said, what do you mean nothing? I'm doing Bible studies. You go, no, you're not. You're not doing anything. I said, so, full-time ministry? Yeah, we should be doing something. I said, okay, local, or as long as you're not doing a lot of traveling. I said, okay, so full-time, no traveling. Yes. I said, good. So I went to the Bible study. This guy, Steve Farrar, was teaching. I got to know him, and I said, I need you to pray about something. I want to re-engage in ministry again. I want you to pray about what God would have me. Came back the next week. He said, I got this friend who's doing thing with men. It's right up your alley. I know you're passionate for guys. He could use a guy like you. I'm going, well, who is he and what's he do? He said, Pat Morley with Man in the Mirror. I'm going, like the song? He goes, no, the book. I go, well, give me his number. I'll call him. So I went home and I did my Google research. We found out that these guys really have a clue. They understand the need and understand the critical nature of discipling men. So I called them, and they eventually believed me and hired me. Wow. So I got hired through Man in the Mirror probably 12 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. So the idea is to train and teach pastors and men's leaders, teach them how to develop strategies for discipling men, for reaching men, and then teaching those men to disciple other men. How do you do life on life discipleship? How do you grab men's attention? How do you create value for those men that they might understand this necessity? Because they believe it, as I did. You cannot change the culture, and you cannot stop the decline if you do not disciple men. I don't care what else you do. Right. Youth ministry, women's ministry, it's going to keep declining. Right. For some reason, God chose men to be this catalyst for healthy marriage, healthy family, healthy society. Right. If that's failing, then it's because of men are failing. One of the things that struck me early on was, if you're reading the instructions to the children of Israel when you come into the promised land, and then later on, God tells them they're to come and have this worship, right? 3 times a year, your men and your boys of age, they're to come up to the city and worship me. And they bring a gift. I'm going, okay, so why does he say to men? And then he tells the men, I'll take care and protect your wives and your crops. You just come. So over and over again, God tells men to come and worship and follow him. And if you do, I'll bless you. And I'll bless the land. If, however, you fail to do this, I will curse you, and I will curse the land. And in every single case, when men stop being godly men, chaos has reigned. And it's no different from us now. So that's my sort of obsession, reaching men, both personally in my own neighborhood, and then training pastors and men's leaders. How do you effectively reach men? How do you effectively disciple those men? And then how do you create a culture in your church where those men feel compelled to disciple other men? And not just sitting in a group of men in a room, but how do those men live life with another guy or a couple other guys? Sure.
Oh my goodness.
Still doing it.
Yes, and it's so important. We see that the men just aren't present.
Yes.
Literally in the home, and if they are, they're not engaged for the most part.
They aren't. It's not. I tell people it's not the idea that men cannot connect and engage. It's just they don't value that enough, and they don't understand the value of that to do it, right? And no one sort of appeals to them. One of the things that there are pastors, I hear it all the time, right? Men, they just aren't interested, they don't engage. I said, well, let me ask you something. If I stood in front of a room, and right here in the Dallas area, and I said, the Cowboys suck, and every pastor had the same reaction. They laugh because why? They know the reaction I get in the room. I said, let me get this straight, Pastor. So your men, I could talk to 1,000 men in your room, and I would ask them, tell me why the Cowboys aren't on a horrible team. They'll say our defense and our offense did this, and our right? Then I can ask you, every single guy in the room, how many of you guys ever met a Cowboy player? You might get one. How many of you guys ever stepped on the field? How many of you been anywhere other than the stands? Some of them haven't been to games. But yet, there's this ownership of our team, of our offense and our championship. You don't know anybody in the team, but say, okay, Pastor, let me ask you something. That guy has ownership in a football team. The average fan spends like $250 per game or something like that. Okay, tell me what Jerry Jones knows that you don't know. Why are they that committed and bought into a football game, a football team, but not into a thing like your church, which has much more significance, much more eternal, and much more important? So it's not that men won't engage. It's not that you can't reach them. It's just knowing what they value and how to go about doing that. So that's what we endeavor to do at Man in the Mirror. Teach churches and pastors, how do you create value for men? How do you sort of take that value you've created and then sort of use that, sustain that value, and build on that. And then how do you then sustain that culture once that's in place?
So let's say that we had 1 million men watching this show right now.
Yes.
What would you say to them?
I would tell those men that there is no substance to life, no purpose to life outside of that which God has planned and fashioned for you. And outside of that plan, you are a man without purpose and without any real future at all. And that my impetus for you is to come to know Christ in a passionate way. And then you, knowing that, pour into the lives of other men, that they might pour into other men. That's the plan God has for us. And there's no plan B. That's it. If you want to see the country revive, if you want to see families revive, you want to see marriages stronger, and you want to see children growing in healthy environments, commit your life to discipling other men, coming to know Christ and discipling men.
Right. And maybe they haven't taken that first step yet, where they've come to acknowledge Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
Yes.
You want to address that?
I would urge you, that if you're watching this program, more than likely God is already speaking to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. I would urge you to answer that call. That without Christ in your life, you have no life. Without Christ in your life, you have no purpose and no meaning. Yeah, I would urge you to do as I did, to give your life to the Lord and watch Him transform your heart and your mind and do things in your life that you never imagined possible, more than you can imagine or think. So I urge you to answer Christ's call in your life. Give your life to the Lord Jesus Christ.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron, for being here today.
My pleasure.
And if you want to reach out to Ron, maybe you'd like to have him come and speak to your man, speak to your church, you can find him on maninthemirror.org. Yes. Just look up the site, maninthemirror.org. It's been a pleasure to hear your story. You've
Well, my
gone
pleasure. Thank you.
from one extreme to another, and we're so thankful that we're brothers and sisters in the
Praise
Lord,
God.
and we serve the same God.
Praise
We'd
God.
love to hear from you as well. If you've enjoyed the show, reach out to us at info@roaringlambs.org. If you have a question about Jesus or just want to know more about this personal relationship that Ron talked about, call us. We'd love to talk to you on the phone. Our number is 972-380-0123. We'd love to answer any questions and have you begin that special relationship with Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And if you know Jesus, then we have one more challenge to you. Be a roaring lamb. Go out and roar about the goodness of God.
Amen.
At Life Stories Company, our passion is to preserve your story in a personal memoir. These beautiful books can be shared with both friends and family for generations. For the past 28 years, we have helped over 200 clients share their history and wisdom. As a Christian, what better testimony than to share how God has led you and provided for you? Visit us at lifestoriescompany.com. Sharing your story and honoring God. lifestoriescompany.com.